Like, for my personal taste, a show about making sandwiches should not have more screaming in it than a show about an overcrowded emergency room. Like, they're literally acting like the sandwiches are flatlining. Hey everybody, it's LavenderTowne, and today I'm talking about my biggest, weirdly specific movie pet peeves. So to start this off, I'm going to say something very brave, very vulnerable. This may be a hot take, but I think that in dramas, both in movies and TV, the characters shouting over top of each other has become like what jump scares are to horror movies. Now, let me explain. Lately, I've noticed a lot of movies, especially like award-winning, like really successful movies, like Uncut Gems, Anora, even the TV show The Bear. There are a lot of characters who spend a huge amount of the movie screaming at people and talking over other people, and the overall result is that your nerves are like ratcheted up. You feel extremely tense, and I think that for a lot of people, you know, this is a good thing because it's a drama, and so it's making it feel even more tense, even more serious, and you feel like you're really experiencing the emotions the movie is trying to make you feel. I think this is very similar to the jump scare, because a jump scare is also a shortcut into making you feel the way that you're supposed to feel in a scary movie. But that's one of the reasons I think that using jump scares too much can be kind of cheap or lazy in a horror movie. A lot of people feel this way, right? Because you don't actually have to build a really scary atmosphere in order for a jump scare to make you startle and have that adrenaline spike. So it's not as hard earned as like a really scary movie that's been slowly building up a story in a scenario that really scares you. And in a dramatic movie or TV show, I find that oftentimes some of the quietest moments, or the moments where the characters are trying to keep it together, are actually really dramatic and feel really rewarding from a storytelling perspective. So I am starting to get a little annoyed with what feels like a shortcut to that feeling of tension through the characters just being really, really loud. A good example of this is actually between Anora and The Substance, which were both movies who were up for the Best Picture Oscar. Anora ended up winning. I honestly thought that The Substance deserved it more. And part of that is because Anora was full of this pet peeve for me. I felt like the central drama was not that compelling because we didn't really know almost anything about her. She has almost no agency in this movie. A group of guys come in and say, hey, you need to come with us and help us find Ivan. And so she goes with them and she yells, where's Ivan? Do you know where Ivan is? Call Ivan, for a huge portion of this movie. I personally couldn't tell in the movie whether she genuinely loved Ivan or if she just liked his stuff. I felt like they were using the loudness and the shouting to make it feel more tense than it really was. Whereas you compare it to a movie like The Substance, which, while it has, of course, really loud moments, they aren't ultimately necessary throughout the movie because it's so well established from the very start what our main character really wants and how important it is to her, and also how dangerous what she's doing is, which automatically creates tension that you don't need loudness to enhance. There's lots of scenes where we know the consequences of something a character is doing, and so that tension is already there, even if the character themselves is not taking it that seriously. And to me, quiet, tense moments like that feel way more impactful and earned. And like, why does The Bear, a show about making sandwiches at a local sandwich shop, have so much more screaming in it than The Pit, which is a show about a doctor trying to get through his day in an overcrowded emergency room? Like, half the time they're really acting like the sandwiches are flatlining. This next pet peeve was really strong in a movie I watched recently called Ash. It was supposed to be a sci-fi horror movie, but there was one problem with it that was so incredibly distracting, it made the whole movie really hard to watch. And it was that the very beautiful main actress was not moving her face like at all. Now, this is a problem that affects both actors and actresses. I do think it affects actresses more just because the beauty standard is so strong and severe. But I do notice that sometimes when you're looking at an actor working, you can tell that they're afraid to make an ugly face, and it causes the whole performance to completely fall apart. This is definitely at its worst in action and horror movies because we're really required as the audience to believe that a bunch of really scary stuff is happening or really intense physical combat. And when the characters aren't reacting in their face like appropriately, it actually is quite confusing and it really damages other parts of the movie. For example, in this movie Ash, there's a scene where she is like hit and knocked down, there's a physical scuffle, and I noticed that as she was falling down and was knocked to the ground, her face just looked completely like placid, like she didn't really care what was going on. It definitely did not make it look realistically like she was fighting with anyone. And there's lots of times when things were supposed to be scary and all she could do was open her eyes really wide. It just bums me out because obviously like your role as an actor or an actress is to act. It's to emote and really put the audience into this story that someone's created. Now, admittedly, I don't think the writing in this movie was particularly good either, so maybe it also wasn't helped by that. It mostly was just like trying to rip off like The Thing and a lot of other really good sci-fi horror movies. But I've noticed this in other movies as well. In Mission Impossible, there was definitely an actress who I felt like was definitely too focused on looking glamorous and cute and quirky, rather than really believably conveying that she's fighting. And these are movies that are stylized. It doesn't have to be super gritty, but it gets to a point where you can clearly tell these characters are not in pain, and they're not really exerting themselves. And honestly, it just bums me out seeing people who are so afraid of looking ugly that they're willing to damage the actual job that they're doing, which is acting first. I think Mia Goth is a really good example of like a very beautiful actress who isn't afraid to like emote with her face as strongly as she's capable of, and I think that really pulls people in. If you look for it, you'll definitely notice there are also cool guy actors who fall into the same thing, where they're kind of pulling the same sort of faces that they think look handsome and cool over and over and are too afraid to look too weepy or too contorted. And yeah, I think it's a bummer. I feel bad that there's so much pressure on these public figures. And I understand why they would be in their heads about this. I mean, if their face is going to be like 12 feet tall on a silver screen, it would be easy to get really self-conscious and in your own head. But it only makes me even more impressed by those actors and actresses who are willing to go all the way and really feel what their characters are feeling and really make these stories come alive. This next pet peeve of mine is more about how the whole industry is moving rather than one specific movie, but it definitely affects specific movies, and that is the way that a variety of special effects jobs that used to employ a bunch of different specialists have all sort of been slowly funneling just into CGI. Now, CGI artists get a lot of criticism and a pretty bad rap in general. I think a lot of the time people like to point out bad CGI when it might not even be that the CGI itself is bad. I think the biggest problem, and we actually talked about this a long time ago when I was talking about the Cats movie, is that the CGI is not being applied to things that CGI is actually good at or best at. Now, movies used to have a bunch of different professionals who would help create the fantastical worlds that the movies required. So we're talking matte painters, we're talking people who would make prosthetics and really elaborate makeup for the actors in order to change them. We're talking about really specific like armatures and special costumes. And some of these jobs still exist and some of them kind of don't, because a lot of the time studios are opting just to fill everything in with CGI. Marvel movies are really bad about this, and Disney live action movies. When you look in the behind the scenes content, it's often just a bunch of A-list actors standing around without their full like costumes or anything, and they're just standing in a big blue or green room because almost the whole movie is going to be animated behind them later. One of the reasons this is not as good is partially because it makes it way harder for the actors to realistically respond to what's happening, but also because there's a lot of things that CGI still isn't convincing enough. Even if it looks photorealistic, there's subtle things that we as humans pick up on that we're just not at that point yet with CGI. One of the best examples of this is like massive scale and things that are underwater. So when I was rewatching Jaws recently, I noticed how good the shark still looks because it's a real animatronic shark, and the actors are really looking at a real shape of a shark in the water, and you're seeing the real sunlight go through the water and hit this object that looks exactly like a shark, and it makes it way more convincing than like The Meg or any of these shark movies that utilize an entirely CGI shark. It's just not as convincing as a real object that you've been primed to believe is a real shark. You just believe that way more. I also think it's better and healthier for the industry if there's all these different departments of people who are artisans and experts in their field. I think when you see something like Pan's Labyrinth or The Shape of Water, you can see the benefits of using like real costuming and real prosthetics. You compare that to like the dwarves in the Snow White live action movie, and CGI is just really not there yet. Like, it does not look as convincing. It's worse for the actors, and I just feel like it's a big missed opportunity that's also putting a lot of really cool people out of work. So I really do think that, like, while CGI itself is not bad, and I don't think we should be banning CGI or anything or discouraging people from using it at all, I think we need to pull back from the idea that CGI is always the answer to everything like magical or interesting that's happening in the movie, and maybe re-employ some of these older techniques that are still able to produce better than what CGI can in a lot of cases. Next up is a story thing, and this can happen even in pieces of media that are not movies. It's kind of an issue anytime that we're developing a tragedy, but one of my biggest pet peeves, and this is so weird and specific, but this is when a character dies, like early on in the story in particular, and you get the sense that the creator really wants you to be sad about it, but the creator has not spent any time making sure that you actually know much about this character. A lot of the time this is like a motivation dead wife or something for maybe an action husband to avenge them or whatever. It can also just happen where a character needs to be motivated by grief for different reasons, but they just end up really hurriedly killing off a character, and you know, the music and the way that the scene is shot is really implying that we as the audience are also supposed to be sad about this. And obviously if these characters were real, we would be sad because, you know, death is sad. But when we're talking about fiction and they haven't spent any time actually letting the audience into who this character actually is, or, you know, really knowing anything about them, it just feels really underwhelming and almost kind of manipulative. I have an insane example of this from a very popular movie, and I know I'm gonna get booed and hated on and people are gonna throw tomatoes at me, but I think the great grandmother from Coco is a great example of this. I know, okay, I've had so many people say that this moment in the movie Coco is so sad and so touching, but I really think it's primarily just because of the music, because I really don't think that they really developed her character. So for it to be like the big standout emotional moment in Coco, a movie that's really more about Miguel finding his father and his connection to music through his father and his family, I really felt like she kind of was just sacrificed to have a sad moment in the movie and tie in more about the theme of life and death and the afterlife, without the adequate amount of time spent on making her seem like a real human character who is, you know, more complex than just somebody's great grandma. I do think that character deaths in children's movies are really interesting because it seems like there's a lot of decisions that have to be made for it to feel appropriate for a kid's movie. I think that Pixar has been really good about this in the past, and I also want to say that, like, I do understand there are situations where a character's grief really is the important thing. We as the audience don't need to feel their grief, but we're just more understanding their grief. I would say that the opening of Up is a good example of that. But even so, just for my personal taste, I think it's really important to establish who this character was as an individual before killing them off and starting the violence. So those were my weirdly specific movie pet peeves. Let me know if you have any of your own. I really love movies, so things like this have to eventually pop up. But yeah, if you've gotten this far in the video, thank you so much. Please let me know your favorite movie you've watched recently, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much to my wonderful members and patrons, including Philip Verbicario, Celery Sticks, I'm a Potato, Prince Piplup III, Honey Kitten, Nee Nico, Novel Goblin, Loro, Dada, Lily McFarlane, Artist James, Skitten, Gold Pikachu, Clad, Songbird Galesworth, Sunshine, Whimsic, Asri Cryptid, Hoodle Doodle, River the Goblin, Raz Tarosh, Kobe Octo VTuber, Graveyard Moss, Grexius, Maddie Momo, The Midwestern Menace, CB, Lucy Amajiki, Live Live, Ravens Crow, Zossalot, T-Hill Music, Jabber Dabber Doo, Light Jewel, Kadaria, The Expressive Poker Face, Tsubaki, Cutie Pie, Ice Cream Pal, Kola, JJ Jade, and of course, Lib Lib Blah Blah.